In this video, we're going to talk about the stitch that's called the drop stitch. This actually will help create kind of a lacy look in your project. Now what I've already done is I'm using the sock loom 2 from Authentic Knitting Board, and I've already done a cast on row, and I've already did a little bit of a garter stitch just first to show you the difference between doing a drop stitch and a regular type of stitch. So if we turn this, you'll see that what we're going to be creating is a more lacy, open kind of weave. And this is great for like lacy scarves for in the spring, or even doing a hat in the round. You can do this in the round as well, and you can have a really cool lacy hat that way as well. Now, like I said, this part was just my cast on, and you can cast on either way, you know, with E-wrap or crochet or whatever other cast on you want to do. And I just did a little bit of like a garter, but you don't have to. That was just to show you the difference between where we don't drop stitch up here and where we have drop stitched. So I'm going to show you how to do this, and it's really simple. Now the yarn I'm using is a thinner kind of yarn, so again you're going to have to determine by your loom whether or not you're going to be using one strand or two, or if you want to choose a bulkier yarn. So again, it's important that you sometimes do a sample just using a few pegs to get an idea of the yarn that you want to use for your project. And again, you can use this in the round if you wanted. So what we're going to do is grab our yarn, and as we're going to work this way doing the drop stitch. It's fairly simple. All we're going to do is we're going to go to the next peg and we're going to knit it over. Now what we're going to do is we're going to wrap this peg again, but leave it alone and move on to the next. So you go to the next one, you wrap it, knit it over, re-wrap it, leave it alone, and move on to the next peg. And you're going to continue this process all the way down however many pegs you have decided to use. Now what's going to be hard is if you're a loomer, you always want to seem to knit over when you see something wrap. So when I was even doing the sample, I had to tell myself, wait a minute, I'm not knitting over, I have to leave it alone. So again, you're just working your way down the loom, re-wrapping. Now what's important to know is as many times as you wrap it, like again, we're knitting it over and then we have to re-wrap it. If you wrap it more than once, you're going to have a bigger drop stitch, but I'm just doing it once just to show you. But again, you can alter it very easily by how many times you re-wrap it before you move on to the next peg. Just try to be consistent if you can. And this is all this is, and I'll show you the cool thing that happens when we get to the end. I didn't realize I casted on this many pegs. Okay, so it's a pretty quick process too. And when you get to the end, I don't usually do the drop stitch on the last peg. As we see, we're getting closer to our last peg. We're just going to knit that over. We're not going to worry about doing the drop stitch because it's going to be a little trickier to do on end pegs. So on end pegs you don't do a drop stitch. Okay. Now, we're almost to the end. So we're doing our last drop stitch on here, and then we're going to this. Now what you're going to do, which makes it cool, is you're going to now go back through and remove the loop that you created. Now be careful when you do this because this is still kind of loose. So if you can, just kind of hold that a little bit to keep it from getting too loose. And then all we're going to do is we're going to remove the top loop of each of these pegs. And that is what a drop stitch is. And it creates a really cool effect whether you're using a larger gauge loom or a smaller gauge loom. And it's always great when simple little stitches can turn into a really cool project. And again, it's going to depend on the texture of your yarn, the bulkiness of it, the gauge, all that. So there's so many possibilities with a simple stitch depending on what you're using with it. Okay, and the last one. Okay, so what that does, now you have a choice. When you're working your way back, you can either choose to keep doing the drop stitch on the way back, or you can choose to do like a knit row and only do the drop stitches one way. It really is your preference, but for me, I actually like just doing a knit row in between. So I'm going to push these down and I'm just going to do a row of knit. But again, you can choose to do a drop stitch on the way back as well. So I'm just going to knit because I prefer that. But again, you could do a drop stitch on your way back as well. So okay, we're just going to wrap it back to the beginning. Like I said, it all depends on your preference. I mean, I usually do a little knit row. I just feel it gives it a little more definition. And again, make sure the loops are going all the way over. And then I can show you the effect, again, that we just created. And again, make sure the loops go over. And this works out fairly easy, and it's kind of cool, like I said, for scarves, hats, all that kind of stuff. You could do an infinity scarf this way, especially for spring, because it's so lacy. That would actually be really pretty as well. Okay, we're going to swoosh this down, and if you look on the back, well, I'll turn it this way, it's usually easier. You can see that what we're creating is a more lacy effect, which is actually really pretty. And again, it's going to vary depending on the yarn and stuff you use. Let me get this a little closer for you. So what it does when we do our drop stitch is it creates that little design kind of idea. And again, I did a knit row, but you can keep going back and forth with doing a drop stitch. Now again, like I said earlier, if you want more of a drop stitch, then you're going to wrap each peg, when you rewrap it, more than once. You can decide to wrap them twice, 3 times, and then just remember when you go back through that you pop off all the loops that you added. So it's a very simple stitch to use that can add a little bit of a decorativeness to some of your excuse me, projects. So go ahead and give it a try.